All right, we are back with the Life Principles Daily Bible, going through Genesis, little Psalms, little Proverb, little Matthew throughout the day today. And we're continuing the story of Joseph, and it's really starting to heat up here. As you can tell, if you've watched the last few videos, which you probably haven't because nobody has, my voice is finally getting a bit better. I'm still sick, still don't have it 100%, but yesterday I could barely speak. And we got through that video, so this one should be a breeze. So let's just get into Genesis 43 before my voice gives out. This is Joseph's brothers return to Egypt. So kind of bringing us up to speed here. They went down to Egypt the first time because there's a famine, and Joseph had interpreted the Pharaoh's dream that there was going to be 7 years of abundant harvest, 7 years of drought. So they should save up all of the grain and food during the 7 years of abundance, and then during the drought or the famine, then they would have abundant food or leftover food. And it's a worldwide famine, so people then start coming to Egypt to buy the food, and it's a big wealth creator for Egypt, and it brings down Joseph's family. And Joseph at this point is the number 2 guy in all of Egypt because he's been taking care of basically everything that every position he's put into. He shows how good he is at managing, taking care of things, and how successful he is. And it's not because he's super smart or hardworking. It's because the Lord is with him. It continually says that throughout Genesis, where when he's working for Potiphar, when he's working in the prison, now when he's working for Pharaoh, they notice that the Lord is with him and he's successful because of that. So they put him in charge of everything because they want that same success to come to what they have. So that's what the Pharaoh does with Joseph. He says, Lord's with you. You have success in what you do because of that. So yeah, I trust you with the kingdom. I can sit back and take it easy because the kingdom's in good hands because you are with God. So Joseph has basically stored up the grain. People are coming in. Some of the people who come in are his family. The first time they come in, he kind of plays a little trick on them. He doesn't introduce himself to them. Remember, the last time he saw them, they sold him into slavery, and they don't recognize him because they've maybe forgotten about him, thought he would have died at this point, who knows. And their younger brother, Benjamin, is not with them at this point, the first time they go down. And I imagine some part of Joseph at this point is wondering, oh, great, did they kill Benjamin too? Because Benjamin is Joseph's real brother. That's who Jacob, or I should say Israel, had kids with Rachel. Rachel was his favorite wife, as opposed to Leah, who he got tricked into marrying. Leah was pumping out all sorts of babies, and then her servants were having a bunch of babies. Rachel's servants were having a bunch of babies. But Rachel, who Jacob or Israel really loved, she was having no babies. This was when the baby competition was happening. And then finally Rachel has a kid, and that's Joseph. So that becomes Jacob's favorite son. That's part of the reason he gets the multicolored coat, part of the reason his brothers were so jealous of him, which is part of the reason they sold him off into slavery. Then Jacob has another kid with Rachel, and his name is Benjamin. That's going to be the youngest of the 12 brothers. And Jacob doesn't allow them to bring Benjamin down to Egypt when they go down there the first time because he's already lost Joseph, or he thinks he's lost Joseph, and he doesn't want to risk losing Benjamin as well. So it seems that his favorite kids are always going to be those of his favorite wife. This time around, though, when the brothers return to Egypt, they kind of have to bring Benjamin with them. Because last time, Joseph said, hey, you guys are spies. And the reason I'm going to know you're not spies is if you bring that younger brother back. And again, I think part of the reason he's saying that is because he might be worried, oh, the younger brother's not with them. They probably killed Benjamin too. And remember, Benjamin is his full brother. The other ones are half brothers. So He gets them to leave. I believe it's Simon, however you say it. I think it's Simeon, behind the last time. So at first, Jacob's saying, "Oh, you guys want to go back to Egypt," or he's saying they need to go back to Egypt to get more food. And they're saying, "Hey, the only way we can go back there is if we bring Benjamin." That was kind of the deal. And remember, on our way back, we also noticed that all the silver we thought we paid for the food the last time was still in our camels. So they probably think we stole that silver as well. So we're in some deep trouble here. At one point, Reuben even offered, he said, "Hey, if we bring Benjamin back and Benjamin dies or something bad happens to him, you can kill both my sons." That's how confident I am that we'll bring him back safely. And Israel says, "No, not going to happen." Judah then steps in here, and it seems like Judah has a bit of a redemption in these next two chapters that we're going to read. Because remember, it was Judah who was the guy whose idea was to sell Joseph into slavery. I guess that was better than killing him, but Reuben wanted to just put him in a pit, and then Reuben was going to come back and rescue him later. And it was Judah who said, "Now let's sell him to some slavers." So it kind of Reuben's plan sent Joseph off to Egypt, although God ends up working that together for good. We'll get there in a little bit. So far, and then there's also a weird chapter about Judah. It's maybe a ways back. Judah doing some questionable things with wives and daughters-in-law. We won't go down that. But it seems like in these two chapters, Judah starts to have a comeback. And the first comeback is right about here, where he then makes the plea. And he says, "You know what? If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, then let me bear the blame forever. If we had not delayed, we would have now have returned twice." And then Israel finally gives in. He says, "All right, may God Almighty grant you mercy before the man, and may he send back your brother and Benjamin. And as for me, if I am bereaved of my children, I am bereaved." So it's almost like he's given up at this point. He's like, "Well, we're going to die if we don't get food. Seems like this is the only thing to do. You know what? If I lose my children, I lose my children. Just go." So they go down there, and Joseph sees Benjamin, and he asks them to bring the brothers into the house. And at this point, they're still a little afraid, so that he may assault us and fall upon us to make us servants and seize our donkeys. But that's not Joseph's intention. First off, they kind of own up to what happened last time. They say, "Hey, remember last time when we got food? Well, there was extra silver in our sacks, and we want to pay that back. Plus, we want to pay for new food this time around. We want to square all of debts." And Israel also gave them some gift to give, and any gift that they could give was probably meant a lot, because they're running pretty low at this time. Saying a lot of details that maybe aren't the most important thing. So let's just get to the gist of the story here. They start eating food together, and Joseph is kind of overwhelmed when he sees Benjamin. He even says, "Is this your youngest brother of whom you spoke to me? God be gracious to you, my son." Then Joseph hurried out, for his compassion grew warm for his brother, and he sought a place to weep. So Joseph is so happy to see his brother alive and well that his compassion overwhelms him. He has to run out of the room to cry. Otherwise, his cover is going to be blown, and his brothers are going to know that, hey, why does this Egyptian care about Benjamin so much? And then they might start to connect the dots. Although he's been leaving little breadcrumbs for them to connect the dots already, but it seems too far-fetched that Joseph would be the number 2 guy in all of Egypt. And there is one other kind of point back to the past where it says, "When Joseph came home, they brought into the house to him the present that they had with them and bowed down to him to the ground." So all the brothers are bowing down to Joseph, just like the original dream that he had that was part of the reason they were so jealous of him and sold him into slavery. And it's almost, I think it's the words ironic that it was that dream that made them jealous that led to them selling him into slavery. But then it was him getting sold into slavery that eventually led to him being the number 2 guy in Egypt, which is why they're bowing down to him. So interesting how all of that works together. And that's interesting how God's providence or sovereignty works with human sin, because you wouldn't say that God told the brothers to sell Joseph into slavery, but it worked together perfectly into his plan. And that's, I think, one of the big mysteries of faith is how that works. Because God doesn't compel us to sin. He doesn't want us to sin, but he almost accounts for it within his plans. Not saying we should sin, we should try not to, but it's interesting that he can even turn that into good. But don't do it. So, long story short, they're eating, and Joseph decides to test them. This is the important part. He tests them in 2 different ways. First one, remember, they originally sold him into slavery because they were jealous of him. Partially because his father loved him more and he made him a nice coat. 2, because he also had some dreams where they're going to be bowing down to him. Maybe they weren't so jealous of that, it just made them not like him. Kind of understandable. You probably wouldn't like if the big thing at that time is that the oldest brother is kind of the heir to the inheritance and the head of the family, but then the youngest brother is, one of the youngest brothers is saying that they're all going to bow down to him. Yeah. But basically, he tests them. And the first way he does it is, it says, portions were taken to them from Joseph's table, but Benjamin's portion was 5 times as much as any of theirs, and they drank and were merry with him. This seems that they passed the first test. So it's Benjamin's portions were 5 times as much, maybe seeing if that old resentment, that old jealousy is going to kick back up and they're going to basically try to sell Benjamin back into slavery or something. But it's not what it says. It says they drank and were merry with him. And then he tries to test them again. This time around, as he's fills the men's sacks with food as much as they can carry and put each man's money in the mouth of his sack. So this is Joseph commanding his steward of his house. And put my cup, the silver cup, in the mouth of the sack of the youngest with his money for the grain. And he did as Joseph told him. So Joseph has the steward put his silver cup in Benjamin's bag. They go on their way. And then Joseph has his guys follow him out there. And they say, hey, you stole our master's silver cup. And they say, why would we steal a silver cup? We literally accidentally got our money the last time when we were going home, and we brought that back. Like, that shows we're pretty honorable. So why would we bring that money back to you, plus more money to buy food, and then steal a cup? Like, that doesn't really make sense. If any of us stole the cup, we'll be your servant. Something along those lines. And they say, all right. And then they search from the oldest brother to the youngest brother. And when they get to Benjamin's bag, big surprise, they find the silver cup. So then the reason this is a test is you might wonder, okay, are they going to say, oh, good, that guy got 5 times as many portions as we did last night, and he's our father's favorite. Good, we just got rid of him, and this one's actually not even a guilty conscience. The Egyptians set him up. So that's not our fault. And yeah, good. But that's not what they do. They tear their clothes, which is a sign at this time of just ultimate grief, humiliation, sadness, being upset. I don't know the exact adjective to use there, but they're not happy. And Judah even pleads and says, take me instead. And then this is also where Judah kind of has his comeback, is he has a long speech, basically pleading for Benjamin. And it ends with him saying, "For how can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? I fear to see the evil that would find my father." So it shows that Judah's heart has really changed. And this is maybe the big thing that I've took out of the story today. One, is that Joseph is maybe smart to test them a little bit. And maybe there's some lesson there about sometimes God tests us. But I think the bigger lesson that I got out of it was actually Judah in the story, because in the past, Judah kind of seemed like the bad guy. And now it seems that he's the good guy. And I think that's an important thing to think about when reading, especially the Old Testament here. Some of these different characters like Abraham or Isaac or Jacob or now Judah, is they make mistakes. They're not perfect. It's not one of those stories where, okay, Saruman is the bad guy and Aragorn is the good guy. Or did I just say those names wrong? I better not have, being such a Lord of the Rings fan. Or, Bilbo's the good guy and the orcs are the bad guy. It's complex people who are not perfect. And perhaps this is on purpose. I believe it was my buddy who told me this. But he's saying that after Adam and Eve, we get that prophecy that Eve's heir or offspring is going to crush the head of Satan and have his heel bruised. So the Messiah is going to come from her descendants. So perhaps as we're reading the Old Testament, each time you hear of somebody come up and they get favor in the eyes of God, you think, oh, is this the descendant who's going to crush the head of Satan? Is this the descendant who's the anointed one, the Messiah? And I think a lot of these stories purposely have them do some good things when they're walking with God, but also some bad things when they're turning away from God, to show that they're not perfect, that they're not the Messiah, that they're not the ones that are going to crush sin and evil and save us all, because they can't even protect themselves from sin. How would they protect all of us from sin if they can't even defend against it in their own lives? So that's what ultimately points to Jesus, is that Jesus is the one who checks all the boxes, that is perfect, that does crush the head of Satan. So it would be wrong to read these stories and think, okay, Abraham is the guy we should look up to. Jacob's the guy we should look up to. Oh, maybe now Judah's the guy we should look up to. These are all examples of guys we shouldn't look up to. Maybe in the aspect that they walk with God, we'd look up to that aspect. But ultimately, the one that we want to model is Jesus. Because if these stories are telling us anything, is that these people are as much in their walk with God as we are, stumbling through one day at a time. But Jesus is the one who provides the perfect example. So that's who we should follow. So, yeah, I thought that was interesting. Good to see some character development there with Judah. Don't know if that's going to last. I forget kind of what happens throughout much of the rest of the Old Testament. And I haven't even read the whole Old Testament yet, so we'll see. Now getting into the Psalm 11, 1 through 7. In the Lord I put my trust. How can you say to my soul, flee as a bird to your mountain? For look, the wicked bend their bow. They make ready their arrow on the string. And then it goes on. For the Lord is righteous. He loves righteousness. His countenance beholds the upright. And I like that. In the Lord I put my trust, is how it starts off. And then it says, for the Lord is righteous. He loves righteousness. So, yeah, I don't think we need to get complex there. Trust in the Lord. He loves righteousness. We should as well. And we don't want to be, some of the wicked and the one who loves violence, his soul hates. We don't want to be in that group. Then Proverbs 4, 10 through 13. Hear my son and receive my sayings, and the years of your life will be many. I have taught you in the way of wisdom. I have led you in right paths. When you walk, your steps will not be hindered, and when you run, you will not stumble. Take firm hold of instruction. Do not let go. Keep her, for she is your life. Love that one. That might be one of my favorites yet. Proverbs 4:10 through 13. I've taught you in the way of wisdom. The way he teaches us is through the word. I have led you in right paths. When we follow the word and we follow God's guidance and the path that he has for our life, it is the right path. And usually when we go away from God's word and we try to do things on our own, we end up on the wrong path. When you walk, your steps will not be hindered. And when you run, you will not stumble. So that seems to be talking about when we've been taught in the way of his wisdom, when we're on the right path, we walk and run without being hindered or stumbling. It's when we go off the path, that's where we start to stumble. And it says, take firm hold of instruction, do not let go. So this is our instruction. If we're looking for something to stand on, if we're looking to something to guide our path, to be that, what do you call it in a boat, a rudder that steers the ship? If we're looking for that, this is it. This is our instruction. Do not let go. Let go of everything else. Hold on to this. Keep her, for she is your life. And I didn't even notice that last verse the first time I read it. For she is your life. It's talking about wisdom and instruction. And it says, hear my son and receive my sayings, and the years of your life will be many. So listen to God. Hold on to it. That's going to lead you on the right path where you won't be hindered or stumble. There will be obstacles. It'll be difficult, but you won't stumble in the way that you do when you go off of the path. And keep her, for she is your life. Love that. I think that's one of my new favorite Proverbs right there. And I don't think I'd read that one before, at least before today. Now let's get into Matthew 14. Took me a while to open that. So Jesus has just fed the 5,000, and he immediately made the disciples get into the boats and go before him to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. So you might wonder, why is he dismissing the crowds? Because when he feeds the 5,000, the disciples were literally telling him to dismiss the crowds. They're saying, hey, send the crowds home before it gets too late. It's about to be evening, and we don't have any food, so they should go get some food. And Jesus says, feed them. They say, we don't have any food. And Jesus says, all right, 5 loaves, 2 fish, turns it into enough food to feed 5,000 people, fill up 12 baskets. And he has the disciples help him with that. So it's interesting that now that everyone's well fed, Jesus disperses them. And I guess it's not in Matthew, which we're reading, but in John, where he says that because of this miracle, the people were overwhelmed with excitement and realized that maybe he's the Messiah. So then they start kind of rallying or getting excited about him gaining political power and kind of having him be their king. And Jesus recognizes that their ideas for his mission are different from his ideas of his mission. And maybe his disciples even started to get wrapped up into this as well, because he not only sends the people away, he sends his disciples away as well. He made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. Maybe he's praying to God, saying, help these people understand. Help give me some time to kind of do what you actually want me to do here and not get wrapped into what they want me to do. When evening came, my voice is starting to go again. I better wrap this up quick. When evening came, he was there alone, but the boat by this time was a long way from the land, beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them. And in the 4th watch of the night, which means between about 3 a.m. and 6 a.m., he came to them. So think about this. He's sent them off in a boat. He's sent off the crowds. He's prayed for a few hours. It's now 3 to 6 a.m. in the morning. And there's crazy wind on the sea. and it's pushed the disciples in their boat way off of shore. But then it says Jesus came to them, walking on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It is a ghost." So honestly, pretty safe reaction right there. If you see somebody walking on the water, think, okay, due to the laws of buoyancy, humans can't walk on the water. So that must be a ghost. And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." And that, it's interesting. He says, "Take heart." It's kind of another way of saying, be of good cheer. He says, "It is I." And apparently, the way that's worded in Greek, that "it is I," points back to God in the very beginning of the Bible, I believe, saying, "I am who I am." Or actually, I forget when God says that, but it's where the Jewish people get the word Yahweh. I am who I am. I guess the way the Greeks write a lot of Jesus's "I am" statements have two different words that say "I am," and this is one of those cases. Still a little sick. So Jesus right there is a little bit pointing to the fact that he's God. And he says, "Do not be afraid." Then Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." He said, "Come." So pretty interesting move by Peter. He sees, they think it's a ghost, they're terrified. And then as Jesus says, "Take heart, it's I, don't be afraid." And Peter says, "If it's you, command me to come to you." And then he says, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat, and this is only possible because Jesus said, "Come," and he's given Peter this power. But Peter actually starts to walk on water too. So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." So a lot happens in that little story right there. But what an amazing story. So Peter seems to have some faith. He says, "Lord, if it's you, call me out there." Jesus says, "Come." He starts walking on the water, and he's doing it. Maybe he's a little surprised he's doing it. But then he takes his eyes off of Jesus, and he sees the wind and the waves, and he starts to get afraid, and he starts to sink. His faith starts to fail him a bit, maybe. And to Peter's credit, he has a good response. He says, "Lord, save me." And I love what happens next. Jesus immediately reaches out his hand and takes hold of him. So right off the bat, Jesus immediately saves him. So the big, I think, takeaway from this story is that when you're, first off, don't take your eyes off Jesus. That's when you just get thrown into chaos. Look to Jesus. And when you are in that chaos, and maybe you can't find your way back to Jesus, just say, "Lord, save me." Call out to Jesus for help, because you can't do it on your own, and he will immediately help you. Probably depends on the faith that you say it with. But then it is interesting that it says, "Took hold of him," and says, "Oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased. So Jesus saves him, calms the storm once again. And what is the disciples' response to this? They say, "Truly, you are the Son of God." And they worship him, which is, I would say, the exact right response. If you just saw somebody walk on water, save your friend, your brother, and then calm a storm. That is clearly some Son of God material right there. So it's interesting to me when people have said that the Gospels don't claim that Jesus is the Son of God. the more I read the Gospels, the more I'm confused how that would even be a case anyone would make, especially this story. I think the main point of this, though, as opposed to disproving atheists, which I was for almost all of my life, is kind of what turned me off of that path. Is I got to the point where I was sinking in the water. It was chaos. I knew I couldn't save myself. I surrendered, said, Lord, save me. Not literally, but that was the gist of it. And he did immediately. And it seems like that might be different for everybody, how it happens. For some people, it might be gradual. For some people, like it was in my case, it was instant. It was overwhelming. But then it also seems like it's continuous as well. This story is something that not just happens in your conversion, it seems to be something that happens throughout your entire Christian journey. Something that we're reminded of over and over again, where our eyes are on Jesus, everything's going well, feel like we're walking on water, and then inevitably we get distracted, we get tired, we get sick, we turn our eyes off of Jesus, and we get thrown back into chaos. And maybe our faith starts to waver a bit. And what we have to remember in that moment, call out to Jesus, say, Lord, save me. And he immediately does. And each time that happens, our faith grows. And that's how God takes something that could be bad and turns it into something good. Something that you could feel guilty about and upset about and ashamed about. Like, even if you're sick, spending way too much time scrolling through Instagram reels, wasting your life away, laughing at inappropriate jokes, even laughing at some memes that might even be anti-Christian, things that are meant to whittle down your faith. That's something that can really bog you down and really keep you down and make you want to hide from God. But it's in exactly that moment where you want to hide from God, where you need to call out to God more than ever and just say, Lord, save me. I don't like the mess that I've gotten myself into. And I've gotten myself here. Can you please take me out? And he does. So just remember that. And then the more you remember that, the more you practice that, the more it becomes second nature. So maybe in the future, it doesn't take 5 days, but it takes 5 seconds. And the minute you start to go off the path, you say, oh, Lord, save me. He brings you back on that right path where you do not stumble and you can just walk or run. But either way, you're moving in the right direction. That was a cheesy way to end, but I'll take it.